All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Men's Sexual Mastery Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about sexual shame, the sexual shadow, and self-love, and how a lot of these themes can show up in this work. Oftentimes when men come into our field, into our brotherhood, they don't sense that they have some kind of sexual shame or shadow going on. They've got a porn issue, they've got a performance issue, they have a dead sex life with their partner. But as they get deeper into this work, they often uncover, I'd almost say without exception to some degree, even in my own journey, there's always some form of shame or of shadow that is waiting for us to reclaim and transmute it. So I'm excited to dive into today's topic with you, Hawks. Love to pass it off to you just to speak a little bit to this. How do you see this show up in men who usually come into our community?
Yeah, I'll actually just speak from personal experience here and say that for me, one of the main catalyst for me discovering and devoting myself to this work of sacred sexuality and sexual mastery, this path that we walk, not a destination that you or I claim to be at, but a path that we're choosing to walk. And that catalyst for me was shame around sexual shadow. And the shadow, I guess, since I'm here, I'll start by giving a little bit of a definition of what I mean or what we mean by sexual shadow. So this isn't just referring to like kinks or fantasies that we might be embarrassed of. The sexual shadow specifically refers to the parts of our erotic self that have been exiled because we've learned somewhere along the way that those parts of our sexual expression or desires were unlovable or dangerous or unacceptable in some way. So the sexual shadow can be thought of as anything that is sexually alive within us that we've learned is unacceptable to feel, want, express, or even acknowledge. And so for me, the sexual shadow became less of a shadow pretty early on in my life, in the sense of my own awareness, not acknowledging it. So I lived for a long time with a lot of consciousness and awareness around those parts of my own sexual expression that felt unacceptable and had been exiled by me. And there was a deep desire to come into a greater sense of wholeness, to be able to acknowledge these parts of me without being overwhelmed by them, without needing to act them out, but with also not feeling that there's something inherently wrong with me. Because, I'll finish with this, because deep down I knew that there isn't something wrong with me, and yet I still carried this story or belief that there's something wrong with me. And then that we can just talk about what we mean by shame as well while I'm at it, and then I'll turn it back to you. So shame is the belief that there is something wrong with us. And shame and guilt can be kind of similar, and they're sometimes conflated, but guilt is that we feel that we have done something wrong. Shame is we feel that we are wrong or bad in some way. So for me, there was shame and the awareness that, okay, there's a part of me that I haven't accepted that doesn't feel okay, and yet deep down I know and I trust and I believe that I am okay. So how do I get to the place where I can actually feel that and embody that and live in that way?
Yeah, that's great context. I was just curious, I wanted to hop in and ask, just to clarify, what were those sexual expressions that you exiled, that you repressed?
It's edgy stuff. I've talked about it. I've talked about it before on podcasts, but voyeurism was a big part of that. And I'll just leave it at that. That's, yeah.
Just for men, I think sometimes it's helpful to have like an actual like example of what we're talking about as this like. So that's a great example of sexual shame, which actually I would say I can relate to as well with my own porn addiction. At a young age, I mean, just the whole taboo of being religious and like that this is sinful, this is bad, and therefore I'm bad because I have sexual desires I'm continuing to have no control over. That means there's something wrong with me. I love that you said that. That was the exact same program I had. I think so many men have that one. What's wrong with me in this whole like, why am I this way, And just as another example though, like specifically for me, the porn I looked at, for instance, this can be a great place to start to identify maybe where we have some sexual shadow. Like I had a lot of rape fantasies, and like I look at porn with those kind of things happening, like no consent and forcing and having a lot of shame, even deeper shame around that, or even saying this out loud, that like that's there. But as we're going to get into, like when we can actually own that and not necessarily act on it, but when we can honor that, okay, this is a part of me, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. That's where we can really begin to integrate it, and it doesn't need to act unconsciously. We don't need to suppress it. We don't need to feel shitty about ourselves, and so yeah, that's just some actual examples I just wanted to give of like what this can look like tangibly. So
Yeah. So the question of like how do we see this show up with men that we work with? I think that one of the most common ways that this expresses for men nowadays is in porn use. And like you were just describing there, Ben, there are infinite different genres of porn use, and those will cater to whatever our sexual impulses and desires and fantasies are. And so one man's porn use can look very different from another's, and ultimately what that will reveal to us, if we choose to to look at it in that way, is those deeper fantasies. And so you were describing one there that might be related to power dynamics, to something that we could refer to as dark masculine energy. And I think that's worthy of its own podcast. I'd love to dive deeper into the dark masculine in another podcast. But for now, just to keep us on track here, we can learn a lot about our sexual shadow and those deeper fantasies just by looking at the type of porn that we engage with, if we are. And then there's other things as well, like when it comes to shame, something that I think is worth naming, you kind of spoke to it at the beginning here, is if intimacy or sex has died up or dried up in a relationship, a lot of men, in my observation, can carry shame around that. This feeling that, okay, there's something wrong with me. Why is my partner not into me the way that I would like? Or why do I not feel attraction to my partner in the way that I used to? And so ultimately, like you were saying, when we can get to the root of these patterns that are showing up in our life and start to look at, is there a part of myself that I have exiled here in some way? And then integrating that. And we'll speak more about the integration of that, but ultimately the first step is self-love. And so that being the third kind of piece that you spoke to, this third S word, shame, sexual shadow, and self-love, I think it's also important at this point to talk a little bit about what we mean by self-love, because that can be a kind of a fluffy term that doesn't necessarily carry a lot of meaning or weight nowadays, depending on how it's used and what someone's personal context or experience with that word is, or with that phrase. But I would define self-love as acceptance. Accepting the parts of ourselves that we may have previously exiled. So when it comes to the sexual shadow, if we can bring this energy of acceptance, which doesn't mean that I need to act this out or it's okay to act this out. It's important to differentiate that as well, because some of the sexual shadows and impulses that we might have are not acceptable, or in one expression, they can be destructive, harmful, and unacceptable. And as we'll speak to with integration or alchemization, there are also ways that we can honor what's underneath that impulse or desire in a way that is deeply consensual, that's generative and nourishing for ourselves and our partners and the relationships that we have. So self-love is that nothing within me needs to be exiled. And not everything within me gets to be in the driver's seat. So self-love is having compassion for the whole that we are, all those different parts, and loving ourselves enough to know which parts get to actually be in the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and that piece, again, you brought in earlier, like in partnership, if your sex life has gone flat, just to tie this all together, kind of the core thesis of this is that oftentimes that can be because you have compartmentalized, you've repressed a part of yourself that when fully integrated can actually be the fire in the relationship. You know, that kink that you have or that thing that you think is you're ashamed of or you're hiding, fully integrating that is oftentimes it's going to be the key to unlocking deeper intimacy in your relationship. So yeah, excited to dive more into this, you know, specifically in partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the integration piece that's so juicy and so nourishing and edgy. So yeah, I'd love to get there and just to tie a little bit of a bow on this idea of self-love and then how it relates to shame, for example, is, or rather like the difference in those two energies. Like if someone is carrying shame, that tends to actually perpetuate the behavior that person is ashamed of. Because if someone is acting outside of their values, which I would say is pretty much at the root of where shame originates, acting outside of our values. We have values. This is how I feel a man ought to be in the world. This is what it means, and this is what it looks like for me to be in integrity. And if I act outside of that, then there's likely to be some guilt. I've done something wrong, and if that pattern gets repeated, then it might become a belief that there is something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And so, if there's that energy of shame, where someone's acting outside of their values, then there's a feeling of disgust or repulsion with oneself. That creates disconnection, which then leads to a seeking of soothing or escaping that feeling, because it's awful to feel disgusted with oneself. And so then what often happens is the very behavior that led to that breach of integrity with oneself is the same behavior that creates a perceived temporary soothing of that feeling of disgust, and then the pattern repeats. So that's just something to be aware of, and tends to happen a lot. And I think this is where the cycles can repeat. Mm-hmm. And then where self-love comes into that is if we can take a pause and recognize, okay, I've done something that wasn't in alignment with my values, and I'm not going to abandon myself just because of this one thing I did. And then this comes back to like what self-love ultimately is about, in my perspective, is operating, being in the driver's seat, owning our ship, and navigating through life in a way that is aligned with our values, that is in integrity with who we are and who we want to be. And so if we can pause and recognize, okay, I've done something here that's not in alignment with my values, and I'm not going to abandon myself just because of that and perpetuate this cycle. And I can take a pause and just have compassion for, okay, I've done this thing, but I'm not a bad person. And if I check in with my higher self or my inner authority, there is a part of me that knows what is the appropriate next move here. And then loving oneself enough to actually muster the energy to do that thing that's going to get us back on track rather than perpetuating the cycle. So, and that's really hard. I think that can sound obvious. And when in a shame cycle, it's really hard. It takes a lot of energy, tends to take a lot of energy to break out of that. But that energy comes from love. Love is the most, it's like, it's free energy there. So if we can tap into that, then we can bring that energy of, okay, I love myself enough to not perpetuate this cycle. And I can accept that I've done something I'm not proud of, and it doesn't need to define who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, that pause and that interrupt of the pattern of the shame spirals, or the shadow, the unconscious shadow patterns that oftentimes are running in our subconscious for so many of us day to day, like even myself included. I'm continuing to be in this work and uncover deeper and deeper layers that are separating me from self-love, from full acceptance, which again doesn't mean acting on every desire I have. It just means really allowing myself, as you said, to be in the driver's seat. And, one thing worth mentioning here too is the observer effect, which I geek out on quantum physics and stuff all the time, but essentially it's this phenomena like in nature that, when an observer is present in a pattern, it shifts the pattern. And I won't get into all the quantum mechanics of it, but this is essentially what happens in human relationships. Like, we can be in these unconscious patterns all day long, seeking escapes, numbing, all drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever, porn. And with the help of a coach, or like this is what we do in our work in brotherhood, or with a therapist, or with whatever supports we have, when there's another human being with us, or multiple human beings who walk the path and who can demonstrate that state of presence and pausing and being with it and still showing love, that entrains us how to do it. And this is how ultimately we do this work together. Oftentimes in isolation, we can be really, really stuck in these patterns without knowing what's going on. But I know for myself, for you, Hawks, for so many of us, so many men in our community, this is why it's so helpful to have relationship in this work.
Yeah, and first and foremost, relationship with someone outside of our romantic, intimate partner.
Yeah, don't make your partner your therapist. Rule number one.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the details of that coming up here, because this is a really important piece. Moving into that, we can talk a little bit about the integration. So if we've recognized, okay, there's been some shame that I've carried around certain aspects of my sexual shadow, and now I'm becoming more aware and conscious of those parts of my shadow. How do I get to, and maybe I've even brought in some self-love, some compassion and acceptance, and I can see that, okay, I'm not broken. There's not something inherently wrong with me. And what now? So this brings us to the place of working with a therapist or a coach or a brotherhood, somewhere that we can start to process these things out loud and be witnessed in them in a confidential space, a space where we feel safe and secure enough to talk about some things that in many instances someone has likely never spoken out loud to someone before. This is a pretty typical quality of a shadow. It's something that for a while we were unconscious of ourselves, and then once we became conscious of it, then there's a whole other chapter of when do we actually get to be witnessed by another human in that.
Or if you speak it out loud, someone might shame you from the outside, or you might have been shamed by parents, by others, because other people haven't done that work.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's not always safe to bring it.
Exactly. Yeah, great point. And this has come up before with men that we've worked with, where some of these patterns can start really early on in life because a parent or a guardian or someone witnessed something that they themselves had not integrated, and they themselves had othered and exiled, even though it's a perfectly natural expression of a young person's sexual coming of age and discovery and exploration. And so, like you said there, Ben, it's really crucial that we're when we're first starting to bring the shadow into the light, that we're doing so in in a place that's safe and secure, and where we can be witnessed and supported by people who have a level of integration, or at least a level of acceptance and compassion to not pour fuel on that fire of shame. And so yeah, this is where brotherhood has been, in my observation, the best place for us as men to go in this, because time and time and time again, men come into spaces with something that they've been carrying shame and guilt around their whole lives, and then they finally break through the barrier and muster the energy and feel the level of safety, or at least the level of like, if not now, then when? Okay, I'll step into it, I'll say the thing. And then all of a sudden they're met with like, oh man, me too. Wow, thank you for sharing that. I actually just realized that I have had a similar experience in my life where I've carried unconscious shame and guilt around something that relates to what you shared, and now I feel more acceptance for myself, and then that has this positive feedback loop cascading effect of the man who shared is like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. And it creates this massive alleviation of the belief that there's something wrong with us, because that tends to happen in isolation, and it's the isolating of ourself from the rest of the world, thinking that there's something wrong with me, I have to hide this part away. So all of this is serving to get us to a place where we can then eventually integrate those shadow desires into our romantic relationship or partnership, because that's where the real magic happens, and that's where the true integration happens. It's honoring these desires that we have, and working with a lover to be able to express them in ways that are consensual, in ways that are going to be generative and actually like incredibly fun and exciting for both partners typically. So this brings me to the point of, like, if we're practically speaking about how to bring a sexual shadow into the light in our partnership, the first step is what we were speaking to there, getting ourselves to a place where we're no longer carrying that shame around it, where there's acceptance that like, I'm okay, I'm good, and I actually don't need confirmation from my partner that I'm okay. And there's a desire to share, to disclose part of ourself with our partner, so that we can be more whole in that relationship. And the other side of this, if we haven't gone through the process of actually becoming okay with that truly in ourselves, and metabolizing some of the beliefs that there's something wrong with me, that this isn't okay, that I'm going to be rejected, then if we try and just jump over those steps and bring it right from, okay, I'm conscious of this and now I'm going to bring it to my partner, then we're probably going to be coming with more of an energy of dumping, like offloading. I got to get something off my chest. And that is likely to have the opposite effect of what we're really desiring. So it's just worth checking in, like, am I sharing this part of my shadow with my partner to make me feel better? If that's the case, then you're probably dumping. And if I'm sharing this part of me with my partner to create more connection and closeness and transparency and trust between us, then that's more on the disclosure side, and that's a much healthier way to bring something like that to our partner. So it's like the difference of, I need to tell you something, got to get this off my chest, versus like, there's something that I've wanted to share with you, and I'm not looking for anything here except to allow you to get to know me better. And the difference with how we bring that to our partner will massively influence how it's received and the outcome of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. The full metabolization, as you said, of whatever this is, and with that disclosure bringing to our partner, that's when it often can become, an invitation into exploring your fantasies and sharing things that you maybe never would have shared. And that can open the door to actually allowing an experience of the fantasy of this energy that's within you in a way, as you said, that's consensual, that's healing, that's generative, and it's not needing to be off-gassed into porn or into, these other areas, or just dissonance within ourselves, and these shame cycles. So Hawks, do you want to speak a little bit about any last pieces to like bringing this into partnership and how to go about it?
Yeah, I want to speak to, like, to come back to why it can be so destructive to not bring these things
Mm-hmm.
into a
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
And with the caveat of it can also be destructive to bring them into relationship too soon, too fast, if we're not ready, or if there isn't a really solid foundation of trust in the relationship already. But just to speak to the erosion of sexual polarity in long-term partnerships, this is something that we see all the time. It's so common. There's the honeymoon phase where, okay, there's a lot of novelty, there's a lot of sexual energy, there's just excitement in any physical sexual connection between these two people. They're new lovers in the honeymoon phase. It's amazing. And then what often happens is that honeymoon phase dwindles, it kind of dries up, and now there's this sense of like, okay, well, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with her, what's wrong with our relationship, how come I'm not feeling the same level of sexual excitement and desire that I used to, or how come she's not feeling that. And where what I've come to the way that one of the ways I see this happening is there hasn't been the sufficient acknowledgement and integration of those deeper desires. Because, like I said, in a new relationship, there's lots of novelty, and anything is fun and exciting. But that novelty wears off, like with anything. And so, what's underneath that novelty is deeper aspects of our psyche, deeper aspects of our sexual imprinting, of our desires, of what actually really lights us up and ignites that sexual attraction. And it's a little different for everyone. And it has a lot to do with early imprinting in life, and often has shame or secrecy or the element of shadow around it. And if we're withholding that from our partner, then we're withholding a part of ourselves and we're withholding a part of our desire. And when we don't express our desire, it doesn't go away. It just goes into hiding. And then eventually it will come out as some kind of, it might show up as flatness, as low libido, of this feeling of like, like, no, I'm just not that sexually, I don't have a lot of sexual energy, or I just don't have a lot of sexual desire. And oftentimes, I think that that's actually due to a repression of what it is that actually does ignite us sexually. And
Mm-hmm.
it could also show up as irritability, as a feeling of, just frustration. And all of that is going to lead to the erosion of the connection, the trust in the relationship, and it's doing a disservice to the potential for sexual connection in the relationship, because our partner wants and needs to feel our desire the same way that we want and need to feel her desire. That's the charge, that's the polarity. And one of the best ways that I've found to keep that polarity alive is to continually check in on what's underneath the surface here. If I feel like I'm not really sexually excited or interested right now, is that entirely true? Or is there something that I might be withholding right now?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's important to have the level of trust and to have our own integration, personal processing time, and
Support
metabolization
systems.
of what
Yep.
those things are. But ultimately, if we can get to the place where, hey, I'm comfortable to name what I really desire right now, and then we can bring that into the relationship, it's like this boom, new burst of fuel for the fire. And that's what can create a perpetual honeymoon phase when both partners are able to continually check back in. It's, hey, this would really excite me right now. This would really turn me on. Not just feeling like we need to depend on the old traditional way of making love all the time. That might have worked for the honeymoon phase, but if we're not keeping things alive and exciting, and part of keeping something alive is by honoring what's actually alive in me, then it's inevitable that things are gonna that the intimacy is gonna dry up, the desire is gonna dry up, and the polarity is going to dwindle. So integrating our sexual shadow, being able to name our desires from a grounded place where we're okay with ourselves, we trust ourselves, and we have a level of communication and trust in the relationship where we can bring those in. That's what, in my experience, leads to a really long-lasting, thriving sexual connection and relationship. So it's, I guess, like one of the ways I would sum this up is a man withholding his real desire he might be thinking that this is the considerate thing to do.
Such a nice guy.
Yeah. But actually he's removing a piece of himself from the relationship. And over years that will lead to disintegration. It might lead to two people who feel safe with each other, but they aren't actually fully known and seen and felt by each other. And it's the full seeing and feeling that allows for that attraction and that polarity to continue to perpetuate. Safety is great, but safety is also can be really boring, and we can have safety with aliveness and excitement and authenticity all at the same time, and that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that last piece, that safety is vital, but it's also can make things really flat. And that's exactly the image I was having as you were describing that. There's like this yin and yang in relationship to maintaining intimacy. Like if your partner's not safe, if you're having emotional outbursts, or there's not clear communication or emotional stability, or if there's elephants in the closet that are unprocessed, that's not going to allow intimacy either, and that's more of the yin, the soft, like lovey-dovey, or more of like the roommate stuff. Like we get along really well, we're best friends, But then this dangerous aspect is the sexual shadow that we're talking about, is claiming desire, which by its nature is edgy, it's uncomfortable, it's an itch, and also it's never ending, So there's like we did an episode a couple podcast episodes back on how to claim your desire without attachment. So like equanimity is a really important thing to presence, which is also a part of the integration, outside of the relationship, being able to bring that desire into the relationship in a clean way that's not agitated, that's not needy, that's not pressuring and guilt tripping our partner. That's just one last thing I wanted to presence to all of this integration piece. So.
Yeah, that podcast on owning your desire could be a great place to go if and when someone has gone through the steps of metabolizing shame, bringing in self-love, and then they're ready to step into more of that sexual shadow, the integrated expression of the sexual shadow. And yeah, again, just reiterating that sexual shadow doesn't mean that this is something inappropriate. It just means there's a part of us, there's a part of myself that I have exiled or come to believe that that is not okay and can't be seen or witnessed by others or myself. So yeah, that's another resource. And before we wrap this up, I want to come back to shame and self-love and really drive home the actionable steps here, no matter where you're at in this process, to come back to the beginning of the awareness of, okay, there's a pattern playing out in me that isn't in alignment with my values. And if that pattern is perpetually playing out, whether we acknowledge it or not, it's going to lead to some degree of shame, because guilt can only repeat itself so many times until we start to believe that, okay, this pattern just keeps playing out and I can't seem to change it, so there must be something wrong with me. And the one of the most powerful ways that I've seen men, and that I myself have been able to metabolize that shame to get to a place where I can now bring these deeper desires into my relationship, to share that with my partner and be met in a way where we can integrate and alchemize that and create something amazing that I didn't previously think would be available to me in relationship. The most powerful thing that I've seen is for men to clean up those patterns that keep playing out. And one of the common ones we'll just keep using here is perpetual porn use. And if that is something that feels out of alignment with who you are, with your value systems, with who you want to present yourself as in the world, if that's still playing out in the background, then it will be eroding some sense of self-trust and confidence. And that's okay. There's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that we haven't yet been shown and provided the systems and accountability and structure and support to actually repattern those things. And so when we start to make those shifts behind the scenes, we're no longer acting in secrecy in ways that feel out of alignment, then all of a sudden the energy and the confidence and the power is there to bring these things into relationship, to own our desires.
Yeah.
But until that work has been done on the back end, or what happens when nobody else is watching, it's going to be really difficult, and it's going to be inauthentic in some way to really claim those desires in relationship. And it's that level of safety and trust in oneself, in a man's self, that allows him to then bring that same level of trustworthiness and safety into his partnership, and bringing these edgier things into partnership in that grounded way where she can feel this is a man who's aware of what he wants, but he's not driven by them in a way that feels uncontained, unsafe, and volatile. And so it's that coming back to the self-love definition, and I'll finish here. It's that nothing within me needs to be exiled, but not everything gets to drive.
Amen. Preach it. Yeah, and just to mention the systems, the tools, the coaching, the accountability, that's everything. That's exactly why we created MSM. So if you're a brother listening to this and you're looking for that support, that's exactly what we do and why we do it. So yeah, just wanted to also extend that invitation. And as always, big shout out to all the men in our community doing this work, honoring each of you and the journey you guys are on and have been on, and also all you listeners out there. If you found this podcast, it's no accident. This is really edgy stuff. This is the cutting edge of, the sex ed that none of us ever received, and it really goes deep into our psyche. It goes deep into our patterns, our emotions. Sexuality is the most intimate experience of being human. And there are so many men out there I know, and women, just humans that are suffering or are confused because we haven't had the proper tools and framework and support to align our energy in a good way, to move through these patterns, to not carry the shame. And so just shout out to all of you doing the work out there, and just blessing you guys up in this journey. As always, if you would like to connect with us, check us out at menssexualmastery.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and can leave us a review, it really, really helps us out. It really helps the algorithm. Or if you want to send it to a friend, you're helping support the mission. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, be well.
See you next time.